There should be no event, no street, no town or city in the United Kingdom in the 21st century where Jews are not safe. And that should be our bottom line principle in all of this.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Tim Shipman, the political editor of The Spectator, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Brendan O'Neill, the chief political writer at Spiked magazine and a contributor to The Spectator. Welcome, Brendan.
Hi, Tim. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Today we're going to discuss what's been going on around this football match in Birmingham and the wider context with events in the Middle East. Now, Brendan, we've had quite a turbulent couple of weeks with apparent peace deal that already looks like it's pretty fragile between Israel and the Palestinians. And on the home front, we've had this extraordinary controversy over the fact that the local council and its police advisors have said they don't want fans from Maccabi Tel Aviv to turn up to a football match with Aston Villa. What do you make of all this? What does this tell us about modern Britain, do you think?
It tells us nothing good, I think. This story has been through so many versions already that it's kind of hard to keep up. Initially, the implication was that the police weren't sure that they would be able to protect the fans themselves, the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, and also they were a little bit concerned about what those fans might do. Subsequently, it's become a story about Maccabi hooliganism, the fact that they have some pretty hardcore fans on their side who sometimes kick up a storm, as football fans are wont to do. So it's kind of shifted around all over the place. But my impression is that the police, the West Midlands police, the people they're running scared from are not the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, if we're being brutally honest. They're concerned about what will happen in the local vicinity if people from Israel turn up. If young men from Israel turn up, walking around the streets, waving the Israel flag, possibly, being a bit arrogant, being a bit full of swagger, they're worried about what the local response will be. And I think they're probably right to be worried about that, because we have created a culture of Israelophobia in this country. Over the past 2 years, we've let Israelophobia and in some cases outright anti-Semitism run riot on the streets. We've seen it every weekend in some of those pretty nasty marches against Israel. And I think the end result is that it's probably not safe for Jews from Israel to go to a football match in Birmingham, our second city, and that should worry us enormously.
Yeah, I mean, it's become this political football with the independent MPs who were effectively elected on a Gaza prospectus on one side, and a lot of other people saying, as you are, that this is a very regrettable state of affairs. Some of those MPs have claimed that, this is nothing to do with Israel or with Jews. It's just that we don't want hooligans in the local area. There was an incident recently in Amsterdam with those Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, but I think the club and even the police there would say that the other fans was at least as much to blame. This is just a smokescreen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the history of what happened in Amsterdam last year is really being rewritten in a pretty shameful way. I mean, especially by the left, by certain leading members of the Muslim community, self-styled leaders of the Muslim community in Britain. They're presenting Amsterdam as just marauding Maccabi fans who went completely crazy, tore down Palestine flags, beat up some local people, especially if they were of Arabic persuasion. The idea is that they just kind of invaded the Netherlands and took over and went nuts. That's not actually what happened. Yes, there was trouble from Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. Yes, there was trouble from the Ajax fans as well, who they were playing against. But there was also the Jew hunt, which is being swept under the carpet. There were gangs of mostly Arab men who, in their WhatsApp groups, explicitly said, let's go on a Jew hunt. Let's beat up some effing Jews. There have been 2 trials of the Jew hunters in the Netherlands, one in December last year, one in February, March this year. People have been convicted of saying certain things, making fun of the Holocaust, attacking Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, making racist comments, etc. That aspect gets brushed under the carpet. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why Maccabi Tel Aviv has now made this really sad decision to say that even if Britain changes its mind, we're not going to let our fans go to this country. We're not going to let them go to the Villa game because they're worried about what might happen to their fans in Europe. And they've got a right to be concerned about that, given the racist attack on Maccabi fans that we saw in Amsterdam. But the thing is that I just have this feeling, this horrible feeling that Britain is increasingly surrendering to the Islamist sentiment, to the most extremist views in the Muslim community. I'm one of those people who thinks that the vast majority of Muslims in this country are decent, law-abiding people who just want to get on with their lives. But there are extremist elements, there are Islamist elements who are incredibly intolerant of anything to do with Israel. Sometimes they're outright hostile towards Jewish people. And I think for too long, officialdom, including sections of the police, have kowtowed to that sentiment rather than challenging it and asking what it tells us about the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more encouraging aspects of this was how mainstream political leaders actually did unite and say that this decision was wrong. You saw words from Keir Starmer, from Kemi Badenoch, from Ed Davey, from Nigel Farage. But it feels like those politicians, even having voiced all that concern, the Home Office weighed in as well, were still unable to have this decision changed. By the time the Maccabi club decided that they wouldn't send their fans in any case and they wouldn't apply for away-end tickets, this situation still hasn't been resolved after 48 hours. It looks very much like the political leaders are not able to do anything to influence the local council, the local police, and certainly not a lot of that sort of virulent strain of Islamist opinion that you're talking about.
Yeah, it feels like they are not incompetent as such, but just unable, as you say. They have this incapacity to influence quite an important decision, which is that at a time when we know there is a lot of hostility towards the Jewish nation and towards Jewish people, our leaders, although they've made some very reasonable noises about this controversy and they've stood up for the right of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans to come here, they seem incapable of turning this around or making it clear that people from Israel are welcome in the United Kingdom. That is such an important message for us to send to the world, in my view. The thing that makes me just disbelieve the Islamist sentiment and some of the radical leftists who are saying this is just about hooliganism. I've never seen these kinds of people get so het up about hooliganism before. I've never seen them lose the plot over, I don't know, Russian football hooligans or even British football hooligans. And in fact, some sections of the left have long had a cultural critique of the moral panic around hooliganism. And they've said, let's not exaggerate how bad it is in the UK and other countries. It's only in this instance, with this country and this club, that they have got so angry. They've been furiously tweeting about it and screaming about it for 3 or 4 days now. That's because it's Israel. That's because it's the Jewish homeland. And there is this growing irrational loathing for that one country among all the countries on earth. That's really what's going on here. If we're all being honest, we know that's the case. And the defamation that we see of these Maccabi fans is extraordinary. I've actually just come back from Tel Aviv. I met some Maccabi fans. I wrote about it, a little piece about it for the Spectator. They're good people. They're good young people, men and women who love football, who love having a good time. Yes, there is an extremist element like there is in many other clubs. But Maccabi fans include people like Emily Damari, the British Israeli who spent, I think, more than 400 days in Hamas captivity. Part of that time was spent in an UNRWA facility, which tells us a lot. She was subjugated, injured, treated like trash. She was really horribly maltreated by Hamas for so long. This is the kind of person who supports Maccabi Tel Aviv. And she made the point herself that if it's not safe for someone like her to come to Britain's second city, this is a British Israeli young woman, then this country really is in trouble.
I mean, during the Corbyn years, we saw a lot of this on the hard left, that a determination to assimilate both, Israel with Jewishness and vice versa. It seems to be part of that left-wing critique of what they would rationalise it by saying this is about colonialism, it's about occupation, and they seem prepared to tolerate nothing that Israel does, but yet there's this sort of strange sympathy for, what people on the right might refer to as Islamofascism, people who are grotesquely intolerant, and you see these bizarre, Queers for Palestine banners where, if those people found themselves living under Hamas, they'd be swiftly thrown off a building. The left seems to have a sort of total double standard on this? I mean, you've been analysing this for years. Is this just part of a longer tradition, or has it taken on a different sort of feel in recent years, do you think?
Yeah, it's the phenomenon of the Islamo left. That's really what we're talking about. And it goes back to the 1990s. I mean, I think it was 1994 that the SWP, or one of those parties, published a pamphlet called The Prophet and the Proletariat, which, as its title suggests, was about, the times when it might be appropriate for leftists to make common alliance with Islamists.
It sounds like a right riveting read.
It's a hoot. I highly recommend it. And that has got worse and worse and worse over time. And people forget that 20 years ago we had leftists and Islamists on the streets of London chanting, we are all Hezbollah." We've seen people openly singing the praises of Hamas. At some of these marches against Israel, there have been gangs of young Islamists who have called for the return of the army of Muhammad to kill the Jews. We've seen people chanting for holy war against Israel, i.e. more pogroms, more Hamas-style attacks. We've seen leftists holding up placards with the swastika, tangled together with the Star of David. I myself saw a placard when I was observing one of these demonstrations, which said, "They killed Christ and now they're killing Palestinians." That is classic medieval anti-Semitism. And we've seen it on the streets in one form or another almost every weekend for 2 years. And it's really spinning out of control. And I think it is the phenomenon of the Islamo left. It is this curious, unholy, probably unhappy alliance between a left that has lost the plot over the past 30 years and this kind of surging Islamist movement, this reactionary, regressive movement that is misogynistic, homophobic, and of course, anti-Semitic. And you mentioned Queers for Palestine. That's the kind of epoch of this lunacy. I've often thought if Queers for Palestine went to Gaza, their pronouns would be were pretty quickly. They would not survive for very long. So I just think that the irrationalism of Israelophobia is something that we need to be really, really worried about. I think it has gripped our country, or sections of it at least. And it really demonstrates that the controversy over Aston Villa and Maccabi Tel Aviv demonstrates that we do have a serious problem with integration. My view is that if there is a public event which it is not safe for Jews to attend, whether they are Israeli Jews or British Jews, then that public event should not go ahead. There should be no event, no street, no town or city in the United Kingdom in the 21st century where Jews are not safe. And that should be our bottom line principle in all of this.
I mean, as you observe, this all, on a domestic front, becomes a debate about integration and diversity and the benefits of diversity or otherwise. A lot of people on the right have questioned that for years. The left has always championed diversity. As the debate on sort of immigration now suggests, I think a large proportion of the population is beginning to question that, but we don't seem to have the tools to deal with it. Is anybody making any sense on how you go from the situation we've now got into one where, you don't have no-go areas, you don't have members of the shadow cabinet wandering around saying, I can't see any white faces in our second city. Is there some sensible thinking out there that you're aware of about how, a government can deal with this in any way? I mean, the problem Labour's obviously got is that migration has brought in a large number of people from the tribal areas of Pakistan who are probably at the fairly leery end of the Islamist spectrum, and they vote in large numbers, as we've seen. We've already got 4 or 5 of these independent MPs. Some people predict there'll be 30 at the next election. What should the mainstream parties be doing about this, do you think?
Something. I'm not sure I've got the suggestion of exactly what they should be doing, but the starting point is to acknowledge that we have a problem. I've always had a pretty liberal approach to immigration, historically, previously. My parents are immigrants. I'm a first-generation Briton. I grew up in an immigrant community, and it was a pretty good functioning community. And we tried to muck in with our Brits, the Brits who lived around us, as best we could. And for the most part, it worked. But something dramatic has changed in the United Kingdom over the past 20 or so years. And lots of politicians have clocked this. Going back to David Cameron, who talked about the problem of balkanization and fragmented communities and ethnic bubbles. And he got shouted down, of course, by the noisy left and the liberal elite, or whatever we're supposed to call them. Even Keir Starmer seems to recognize that it's a problem when he talks about becoming an island of strangers. And of course, he got a huge amount of flack for that. I think back to when Kemi Badenoch said quite recently that we should not allow people to come to Britain if they are anti-Semitic or if they have a virulent loathing for the state of Israel. She got so much abuse for that, but I think she was absolutely right. I do think we need to start having some moral standards for who is allowed to come to this country. We should not be bringing people into this country who have deeply regressive views, whether that's on women, homosexuals, Jewish people, or whatever. That is a really stupid thing to do. I think the problem with immigration right now is that we've got the worst of both worlds, which on the one hand, we are bringing in historically unprecedented numbers of people. And at exactly the same time, we've lost sight of what British values are, what Britain's virtues are, whether this is a good country or not. So we're bringing in millions of people and we're actively discouraging them from integrating. We're giving them the message, this is a Islamophobic country. This is a racist country. We're ashamed of our history. We think certain statues should be taken down. We're embarrassed of ourselves. So it's a toxic combination where you invite all these people from overseas, or you certainly make a very lame fist of deporting them when they come here illegally, and you send them the signal that the country they're coming to is worthless. It's not really a good place. And then we wonder why some of them feel hostile to this country in which they are seeking a home. So I think that's the toxic combination that needs to be addressed. And honesty about the problem is the first step to solving it.
Just before we go, let's talk a tiny bit about what's going on actually in the Middle East. And there seems always to be quite a disconnect between the rows about the subject in Britain and what's actually happening on the ground. Most people on the left who put Palestine at the top of their list of political interests would say, Israel's behaved in an appalling fashion since October the 7th. But it seems that that has somehow jiggled the world and the US president to do something about a longer term solution. Yes, they've acted pretty aggressively, but it looks on the face of it like they've neutralised Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran. And are you optimistic at all about where this goes forward from now? I mean, I'm reminded of that phrase Tony Blair once had after 9/11, where he said that the pieces of the kaleidoscope are up in the air and we need to do something before they settle again. And it feels a little bit like that's what's happening in Gaza and Israel at the moment. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm relatively optimistic. I think what Israel has achieved over the past 2 years is extraordinary. And this is one narrative that I'm just so keen to completely turn on its head, because what we are fed from so much of the media and certainly from the activist class, this image of Israel just carrying out a blind, demented, racist genocide, it is so far from the truth. I genuinely think that history will judge those people quite badly who've been saying those things. In fact, what Israel has done is fought a war on numerous fronts against Hamas in Gaza. And of course, Hamas started that war by invading Israel with a 6,000 strong army on the 7th of October, 2023, and raping and murdering people. It's fought against the front in Lebanon as well, and it seems to have neutered the threat enormously from Hezbollah. And of course, it's fighting against the daddy of those movements, Iran, which it's kind of put back in its box. And then, of course, Qatar as well, but that was largely an attack on Hamas. So Israel is fighting on all those fronts on its borders.
And it's used to multi-front warfare, isn't it? I mean, it had that in certainly in 1967 and 1973, and arguably, in 1956 as well. It was it's used to this. This is just another chapter in the story.
Yeah, Israel faces an existential threat on its borders, there's no question. But I think the threat that Israel faces from the West is probably more dangerous in the long term. I often think that Israel is under a double siege. It's under siege from radical Islamist movements, armies of anti-Semites around its borders, but it's under siege from the intellectuals of the West who constantly demonize Israel, who try to delegitimize it, who even openly say that it should not exist. And I think that fight is going to be the harder one for Israel. And I really have no idea how it's going to win it or even how it's going to wage it. But I do think it needs to start pushing back against this Israelophobia that has gripped sections of Western society. When I was in Israel, the thing that struck me was there is such a strong sense of peoplehood and such a strong sense of nationhood. Now, partly that's forged under fire. When you're under attack, you tend to have a stronger sense of needing to pull together, needing to act as a nation, needing to have some camaraderie and so on. But it was also a lesson, I think, to us in the West, which is that it is possible to secure your borders. It is possible to believe in your own sovereignty. It is possible to pull together as a people, even with all the millions of political disagreements we might have. It is possible to restore nationhood and to respect one's own sovereign integrity and one's own democratic integrity. I do think Israel could actually teach us some lessons if only we would stop wagging our finger at it and falsely accusing it of genocide.
And the irony seems to be that the Gulf Arab states take a rather more pragmatic view of it than the British left does.
Absolutely right. There are lots of incredibly influential Arab leaders and Arab forces in the Middle East who are becoming more favorable towards Israel, particularly through the Abraham Accords. I think that's really positive. That's probably one of the reasons Iran and Hamas launched their attacks of 7th of October, because they're worried about the making of amends between Israel and the Arab states. That's a very positive thing, but it's so true. You will meet, incredibly privileged young leftists at Oxford University or on the streets of London who will scream blue murder about the Jewish state as if it's the most evil state that ever existed. Then you will meet an Arab, either in Israel itself or certainly in one of the countries around Israel, and they have a much more normal, relaxed view of the Jewish nation. So that disparity, I think, speaks to precisely the problem that Israel faces, which is that it's fixing the problems around its borders, however difficult that might prove to be in the long run. But what it faces in the West, I think, is a larger crisis of legitimacy, and addressing that is going to be really important.
Thank you very much, Brendan O'Neill, and thank you to you for watching as well.